Welcome to Nasdaq TradeTalks. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq. Joining us for this segment, we have Amy He, Industry Analyst Team Lead at Morning Consult to discuss Morning Consult's Most Trusted Brands 2023 Special Report. Amy, it's great to have you with us. Welcome to Trade Talks.
Thanks so much for having me, Jill.
You got it. What is Morning Consult's Most Trusted Brands report, and what is the methodology behind the report? In other words, how do you quantify trust?
The Most Trusted Brands report is our annual research on brands that consumers trust the most in the US, as well as 9 other major economies around the world. And we do this report because we know that trust is an incredibly important metric for brands to pay attention to. And we get our data through our brand intelligence platform, where we survey thousands of consumers around the world every day and ask them questions about brands, one of which is whether they trust a brand to do what's right. And then that high frequency data helps us paint a picture of the kinds of brands that consumers trust. Now, this report spotlights net trust, which is the share of those who trust a brand minus the share of those who distrust a brand. Obviously, we like to look at how many people trust a brand, but we also know it's really important for companies to know who distrusts a brand so that they can work on active messaging to combat that.
It'll be interesting to see what the year-over-year results will be, particularly in a heightened environment that we're experiencing right now with certain brands struggling with their marketing campaigns. Amy, why is trust critical for institutions, and does the metric experience dramatic shifts year over year?
So trust is a really important metric because it basically determines whether a consumer buys a product or a service from a brand or whether they go with a competitor. It also helps companies weather scandals, and while it's hard to earn, it's also quite resilient. We find in our research that trust metrics don't change a ton from year to year, which is why we generally find that the more established brands tend to rank higher on trust. And our research also shows that trust and value are highly correlated. And as a brand, you want to build that trust so that you can help drive perceptions of value in consumers' minds.
Does trust vary by industry?
So trust does vary by industry, given the nature of how we interact with them as consumers. There are some products and industries that we interface with every day, whether they be in the food category, the payments category, or others. And the more frequently you interact with a brand, the more likely you are to grow aware of them and then get the opportunity to develop positive perceptions of them, which ultimately over time could lead to brand trust and loyalty. And brands in the retail and food industries in particular tend to do well on trust because of that frequent exposure and how necessary they are in everyday part of our lives.
You did a case study on Apple versus Samsung. What did you find there?
Yes, so we specifically looked at Apple and Samsung in South Korea among South Korean consumers, and that's a market where Apple is currently aggressively expanding in, from rolling out Apple Pay after regulatory hurdles to growing its retail presence. But our research note that it's going to be tough for Apple just because of how dominant Samsung is in that country, which is obviously a homegrown brand local to South Korea. And on multiple brand measures like value and purchase consideration, it beats Apple by quite a margin.
You also wrote on Lidl. Why did that brand grow in trust?
Lidl broke into UK's top 5 most trusted brands this year, and that's a region where there's been a very persistent inflation story. Lidl is a discount chain, and trust in the company has been steadily increasing as inflation has persisted and hit record highs in the UK. It's also gained perception of value as well, particularly among those in the middle income level. And not only have those brand metrics grown, it's obviously also reflected in the company's continuously growing sales as well.
What were some of the top brands in the US?
The top brands in the US are really the ones that have been around for decades. So our research shows that trust is hard to build and it takes a really long time for brands to do it successfully, which is why you'll see brands like Cheerios, Kleenex, and Visa. Those are the ones that have been in the public consciousness for a very long time. And then like the other thing that I mentioned about brand awareness, the more frequently consumers are interfacing with a brand, the more that drives trust. And over time, it's not a surprise that legacy and history really build this list.
How does trust differ among the generations?
Given how much discussion there is about how unique Gen Z is as a generation, it's perhaps not surprising that our research finds that Gen Z are generally less trusting than other generations that came before them. And that's not just with brands, it's the case with almost all types of institutions, whether that's the media, federal institutions, Hollywood, other parts of corporate America. We know that you build trust through ubiquity and frequency, and Gen Z are unique in that they've been exposed to certain brands for less throughout the course of their lifetimes right now. But obviously, as they age up and use the brands more, we should expect trust in those brands among Gen Z to grow.
And finally, Amy, anything else in the report that stands out to you?
I think readers always really engage positively with our research when they hear that the Weather Channel ranks as one of the most trusted brands in the US. Primarily because we don't actively think about checking the weather every day. It's so routine. It's done on autopilot. You wake up, a lot of times you're groggy, and then you pull up your weather app. But we have a very intimate relationship with the weather, given that so many of us plan our entire days, weeks, and even months around it. And especially given how erratic the weather has been in recent memory, something like the Weather Channel is what we depend on, which helps it garner high trust levels among consumers.
All right, Amy, we appreciate the insight. Thanks for joining us on Trade Talks. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq.
Thanks so much.